We are talking one of the greatest science fiction space operas of the 1970s. Oh, okay, maybe not. We're actually talking about Humanoid, which is a 1979 Italian Star Wars ripoff that was directed by Aldo Lado, although it does have a couple of sequences directed by Enzo G. Castorelli. Now, this one stars Richard Kiel, who you probably will know as Jaws from a couple of the James Bond movies, and we also have a couple of Bond girls in the form of Barbara Bach and Corinne Clary. So, as I've said, this is kind of one of these Star Wars rip-off movies that came out just in the wake of the success of Star Wars. In particular, from Italy, we had a few of them. I actually have a, you know, somewhat of a soft spot for some of these. I actually genuinely love the Star Crash movie, even though I can appreciate that it is so many things obviously just taken from that Star Wars movie. But I would say this one is probably the most blatant kind of rip-off, with certain concepts from Star Wars literally taken wholesale and plonked in this film. We'll talk about it. Let's talk about the story first of all. Well, it kind of sets up a similar kind of theme where we have this evil galactic style empire run by this guy who looks like Darth Vader, except he's got kind of samurai armor, which is all kind of painted black. Although, interestingly, obviously, Darth Vader's look was based off kind of samurai. So it's kind of interesting that they've used literal samurai armor and just kind of painted it black. He has an army of kind of like stormtroopers, although this time they are black rather than white. Haha, see, there's differences. And they are kind of opposed by our good guys. Now, our good guys live on Earth, or at least it used to be Earth. It's now called Metropolis, and obviously, as this is set millennia in the future. Now, they have developed a weapon which they are keeping hidden, but the bad guys want it. So they have a kind of a raid at the beginning of the movie, which is very, very reminiscent of the Star Destroyer boarding the Tantive ship at the beginning of A New Hope. And they steal the weapon. Now, this weapon is used to create a super sort of weapon by the bad guys, which ultimately makes super soldiers, a la Captain America. Now, these super soldiers feel no pain, they're invulnerable, they're super strong, and they're super obedient. They're kind of dumb. But they need to test it before they actually decide to make this army. So they test it on some poor schmuck who just happens to be in the area, this being Richard Kiel's pilot. And he is ultimately turned into, quote-unquote, the humanoid, this unthinking killing machine. Kind of like Jaws, to be fair, but there you go. And he's used to try and assassinate the kind of the leader of the good guys. And it's up to a small band of heroes, including an R2-D2 style kind of robot dog. We have a kid who has mystical powers, a la the Force. We have our female hero, amusingly called Barbara Gibson or Pamela Gibson or something like, some really generic name. It's quite funny. And we have our kind of like our warrior, sort of male, sort of standard, typical dashing hero type as well. What will happen? You have to watch the movie to find out. Now, we'll try to stay away from reviewing things in a kind of ironic way. I think it's easy. I think it's cheap and lazy. But I will say that this movie does have some value in watching it in a kind of ironic and kind of like laugh at it way, because it's so blatant in some of its kind of copying of Star Wars. As I've mentioned, we have the initial assault is so reminiscent of when Darth Vader and the Stormtroopers first boarded the ship on the beginning of A New Hope. You know, the Darth Vader costume is very similar. We have, you know, we have the Force. We have an R2-D2 style kind of robot. There's so many things here that are so, you know, so easily kind of like traced back to that original Star Wars films. It does make it for some amusing viewing, particularly because this movie is so quickly produced and kind of cheesy and cheap as well. And it's kind of a fun movie to watch in a silly way. But are there any kind of unironic things that I can say that work in this movie's favour? There are a couple of interesting things, and I would say particularly from the bad guys. So we have this Darth Vader looking guy, first of all. And I think he seems, he's portrayed here to be relatively competent, which I quite liked. I actually quite like the fact that he seems to be not some maniacal kind of like cheesy bad guy that just screams and shouts and rants and is completely, doesn't seem to have any real control, which I think is a trap that some of these films end up falling into. I like the fact that he's portrayed to be a somewhat competent leader. I think more interesting though is one of his sidekicks, this one played by Barbara Bach, who is like a female bad guy. Now again, this is maybe one thing that Star Wars didn't have. We had this kind of like this woman bad guy with a storyline, a kind of a subplot, which is really taken from Elizabeth Bathory. So she wants to essentially kill any, or essentially drain the blood of any sort of females that is used to make a serum to keep her young and beautiful. Now this serum only lasts 1 day, so she literally has to kill and extract blood from a woman every day. So she's pretty bad. So I find sometimes with fiction, if you have a female bad guy, she's often kind of coerced into doing bad things, or she has this kind of redeemable thing where she'll turn good at the end. But it's nice to see a truly villainous female role here. And it's interesting that it's taken its inspiration from such a kind of a random, subject matter in the form of Elizabeth Bathory. And out of all of the movie has quite a childish tone to it. But there is one sequence where we see this woman kind of who is naked on this kind of like this contraption getting punctured with all these kind of like needles to suck the blood from her. By far and away kind of the most adult scene in the movie, and obviously pretty kind of, I mean, it's not gratuitously gory or anything, but it's just kind of like the idea there is pretty hardcore considering the tone of the rest of the movie, which has this weird like chirpy upbeat kind of tone. So I actually kind of quite liked her sort of character. I think the idea of Richard Kiel's humanoid character as well is interesting. He's more of a tool than a character, being controlled initially by our bad guys and then maybe able to kind of gain some control himself. And it almost serves as the Chewbacca kind of character, a strong, powerful tank type character in the movie. He's able to deal punishment to whoever he's kind of fighting. There are a couple of fun stunt sequences involving him throwing kind of soldiers around, normally kind of throwing him into kind of like the roof and stuff like that, which I found sort of quite fun. There's some model work here in regards to some of the spaceships that is nowhere near the quality of Star Wars. This looks a hell of a lot cheaper, but there are a couple of sequences where I think some of the model work wasn't too bad, but it's a little bit of a 50-50 because there are some sequences where for example, you see in the windows of the models, and it's done horribly, I have to say. But some of the model work isn't sort of too bad, and we do have a variety of kind of locations here, and I quite like some of the kind of the concepts. We have these guys show up, which are kind of like the Jedi, I suppose, and they're these mysterious figures with glow-in-the-dark kind of bow and arrows that just seem to show up and help our good guys from time to time and almost seem somewhat ethereal. I actually kind of quite found those quite interesting. Richard Kiel here, he's the star, really. It's his first kind of real starring role here. Interesting character. I actually kind of quite liked him when he was his pilot self, which is just a regular person before he kind of got tested on. Because he just seems like more or less just your average dude other than that. Let's talk about what doesn't work. I mean, the attention to detail of this movie is bizarrely weird. For example, talking of Richard Kiel, when he gets turned into the humanoid, before that he's got a full beard, and yet he turned into this humanoid, and how they do it is they fire some missile into a lake which explodes, and then just somehow turns him into this mind-controlled beast, basically. But it also somehow gives him a complete shave, so he comes out this lake with all like a clean shave. It's like, what? Why? Why has that happened? Never addressed. But ironically, he gets a beard again right at the end all of a sudden. Don't know why. It just happens. So that's the kind of the essential sort of like the details we're looking at here. We're not going to go too much into it. I don't want to spoil plot points necessarily, but there's just some odd choices here that kind of just don't make any kind of logical sense and are just weird. I mean, we have this robot dog that just seems to kind of bark and stuff, but it's able to obviously communicate and understand. You know, just because it looks like a dog doesn't mean to say it can't obviously communicate in speech and things like this. Again, it has that weird sort of that weird childlike tone. The music is awful. The music is this weird, upbeat, kind of chirpy music that is not dramatic in the slightest. There are, even though I did like a couple of the shots with the model work here, a lot of the effects are, as you'd expect, super cheap and quite laughable at times. Some of the kind of like the transitions between, for example, when we're using a stuntman to then a dummy, it's like super obvious where Richard Kiel's throwing people around and things like that. I feel the story never really has a central character. It kind of flip-flops between a variety of different characters. And even though Richard Kiel is our, the main person in the title, we never really know much about him. We get no characterization from him, and he just kind of mumbles to himself before he gets turned into the humanoid. Don't know anything about him, really. And then he doesn't speak when he's the humanoid, so we hear nothing. So there's no real central protagonist. I mean, if you look at the Star Wars, we got behind Luke and Han. This movie, we just don't have that. Then we have a couple of substitutes. But I feel the movie never really takes the time to let us get to know its protagonists and therefore care for them. And obviously, as I've mentioned, this movie just takes scenes from Star Wars and just kind of recreates them. And it's kind of somewhat insulting. I mean, the director even went by the pseudonym George Lucas when this movie was released to try and kind of capitalise on the success of Star Wars to make it sound a lot more like George Lucas, which is it's just quite funny. But nothing is ever done. I mean, it gets quite boring, I have to say, because you just feel like the plot is just meandering, kind of like halfway through the film, and then it just introduces so many aspects, and to be honest with you, probably too many characters that we simply don't care. People just seem to be kind of like just not really knowing what they're doing. We have this magical kid that is just, I have to say, a plot device, and again, that vague kind of like mystical powers, things like this. Yeah, it's all kind of cheesy, hokey fun. I don't want to. I mean, this movie would be one of those ones where you would spend hours listing off all the kind of like the things that are individually wrong with it. But I'm not going to do it. Suffice to say, it looks cheap, cheesy, and is basically a rip-off without kind of much thought gone onto it. There are a couple of, as I say, there are a couple of things that I enjoyed, and it is one of these movies that I feel if you want to watch an early mockbuster, here's one to kind of check out. But it's not a good movie. It's a below average movie for sure. It has a certain charm, I'll give it that. I'll give it a 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to you next time. Bye for now.